Network automation. So excited to see this on the CCIE Enterprise Infrastructure exam blueprint. And they're giving us some good topics on network automation. We've got NetConf and RESTConf, which is on pretty much all of the exams at this point. We've also got the tools that they want us to use. They actually specify that we need to know NC client, the request library, and Postman. So we're going to cover those in this particular task, but albeit lightly because they're already been covered a lot in a lot of different places. We've got NetConf and NC client and RESTConf and Postman all over the CBT Nuggets library, and those are things that I've repeated so many times. But there's also some newer topics that are popping up on the CCIE blueprint that don't show up anywhere, like configuring model-driven telemetry leveraging the gRPC protocol. We've got that covered. And then configuring Guestshell so that it runs Python scripts when an EEM applet is triggered. We got that covered too in this particular video. Get ready. This one's going to be big and it's going to be a lot of fun. Automation. Let's bring it home. Let's go. All right, everybody. It is time to tackle the automation section of this workbook. And this is one that, you know me, I like automation. This is kind of one of my jams, and I feel pretty good about this. But I'm going to take a different approach to this particular content, and I'm going to talk about why first. So if you want to skip ahead, I'm going to put like a little text at the bottom of the screen that says like this, you can just skip ahead to the lab task at this point. But this is where I feel strongly about talking about why I'm taking this as a different approach. The first one is that there are things on the CCIE exam blueprint that don't exist on any other blueprint, like gRPC streaming telemetry. You need to know about model-driven telemetry in an auto, but they don't specifically call out how to configure gRPC streaming telemetry, which is something you can do from the command line, and that's what we're going to do. There's also Guestshell and EEM applets that run Python scripts, so you need to have Guestshell in order to do that. Guestshell in particular is very finicky. There is a decent chance that it won't work in my lab environment. I've got a new CSR image of 17.01. This will be my first time attempting to do Guestshell on that image, and I have no idea how it's going to behave, if it behaves well at all. So if it doesn't work, I will certainly defer you or refer you to a great resource where they walk through how to do it. So that being said, like there's a lot of automation content already out there in the wild. NetConf, RESTConf, DNA Center, and vManage. We've got all of that stuff on the CBT Nuggets catalog, and we cover it really, really well, especially in like the Inato and the sd-wan and the sd-access courses. So I'm not going to harp on NetConf, RESTConf, DNA Center, sd-wan. I really just wanted to focus on the new the things that should be totally new to you by the time you're coming to CCIE, even though we're going to dabble in a little NetConf and RESTConf. Because you need to know how to enable it, which is, you know, 2 commands, but still. So we're going to tackle those tasks like that. My assumption is that you know Python, you understand the guts of REST APIs, you understand the guts of NetConf, and now it's just going to be like using it. I also recall something. I need to watch this again on the CCIE webinar. They did a webinar. Peter Pollock did a webinar where he talks about how this type of stuff is handled, and he did say something to the effect of, you will have access to Cisco documentation. I don't know if that means you'll have access to the NC client documentation. Otherwise, like, I think it would, like, the lab instructions themselves, I hope that they give you a lot of help with these things, because it would be impossible to memorize, like, XPaths or memorize, you know, the parameters that are required for the manager.connect class and not function, what I'm thinking, method within the NC client library. So I hope they give us some help there, because that would be brutal. Especially, you know, we don't have VS Code, we won't have IntelliSense to help say these are the accepted parameters in this particular method. So we'll see. But that being said, let's bring up the lab tasks. I don't think I need to do split screen on this one. So let's bring up the lab test and take a look at what we got. On CSR 1000V, enable NetConf, enable RESTConf. Okay, well that's very easy. Use NC client library to get the running config of the interfaces on the CSR 1000V. Print all capabilities to the terminal first. I believe there is definitely a method built into NC client for getting capabilities. I think it's get_capabilities. Then print the running config of the interfaces leveraging this filter. So, you know, I went ahead and gave us the filter to pass in to the get method or git config. I think you can use either one. Use Postman to access. Okay, so Postman is on the exam. Use Postman to access RESTconf interface and also retrieve the running config, receiving a JSON payload. I'm guessing I meant the running config on those interfaces, not the entire running config. But we'll look. Okay, so step 5, this is where it gets fun. Configure gRPC streaming telemetry on the CSR1000V to log whenever CDP neighbors change. So this is going to be on change. It's not going to be periodic. We have the target. The target should be 1033.33.2 on the known gRPC port for a TIG stack deployment, which is 57,000. Traffic should be sourced from gig 2. It should attempt to deliver updates on change, so we're not going to specify a period parameter. Should filter out traffic based on the following XPath, so we say the filter XPath command. Should push a Yang push stream, so it's going to be a Yang modeled stream. And should encode gRPC traffic in a format that the TIG stack can understand. So these are all commands that come within the telemetry IETF configuration section. Then starting with step 6 through 11, we're looking at Guestshell and the EEM applet. So there's a decent chance that that's going to beat me up. Not necessarily because I don't know it, but because virtualization is not kind to Guestshell, but we're going to find out. So let's get this thing started. We're going to enable netconf first. Let's bring up the terminal. This should be the only times we really need the terminal. So on the CSR1000V, I can do show IP interface brief. You can get a lay of the land. My outside interface connects directly into the physical LAN, so like I can ping the internet. With the Guestshell, you can ping the you can configure it to have access to, like you actually do configure a name server so that it can use DNS. That way you can do like pip install commands and add new libraries into Python that is running on this machine. And I'm sitting here saying like we won't need this command line. And immediately I know like we will need this command line for when we get to Guestshell. So with that being said, I've already configured SSH on this device. So the crypto keys are already created. It's now just time to turn on netconf and restconf. So the commands to turn on netconf are first netconf SSH to turn on netconf over SSH, followed by netconf-yang. We should get a syslog message that says we've notified, there it is, to notify the thing to start the netconf process. So we'll just give it a second. Issue write-mem to save new iOS PKI information. That's cool. It's fine by me. How about do right? Okay. And also turn on restconf like that. I think we also have to turn on a IP secure HTTP. No. IP HTTP. Why am I drawing a blank here? Oh man, okay, do show run. Just show. I'm just having a brain fart. I don't want to sit here and try and recall a command from memory. IP. It should be HTTP secure server, right? IP. Yeah, there it is. Okay, yeah, there. IP HTTP secure server. Yeah, that's good. And then IP HTTP authentication. I want to use local. Cool. The running config has been synchronized with the netconf data store now. So I believe it's show platform software Yang. Is that right? Yeah, Yang management. Do I see anything? And then process. Let's see if the processes are running. There they are. So NC SSH, that's the netconf running store there. We also see Nginx is running. That's my web server, which is also going to run for RESTconf for me. And DMI, I believe that is also relevant, but I can't recall off the top of my head immediately what that does. But at this point, netconf and restconf should be up and running on this device. So I'm going to minimize this just to get it out of the way. And it tells us our first step is to use NC client. So between us friends, I'm not a huge, look, this is from the sd-wan course that we just uploaded. This is going to be part of the automation section where we're using the vManage API to gather statistics and info. So I'm just going to create a new folder here under my Python. We'll call this CCIE lab, and I'm going to create a new file in this. We'll call it nc client _demo.py, and let's do from NC client, import, and yeah, I've already got Python installed on my machine. I've already got VS Code hooked up to it. I've already got, you know, my git bash. I've already done pip install NC client, pip install request. So, you know, your Python, I expect you at this point, if you're following along, that your Python environment is ready. Because it's going to be ready in the lab. So, you know, you don't need to learn all of those things from memory. You just need to have it up and running. So let's import the manager class. What else do I need? I don't know what else I need at this point. It'll come to me, I'm sure. And let's set up our filter, which is going to be this XML filter that we specified here. Okay. 1, 2, 3. And let's use the class like this with manager.connect open. Come on, show me the good stuff. Yes, okay, control space. Brings up IntelliSense. And hopefully I can find something helpful. I cannot. And this is where I'm going back to this and thinking like, man, like they gotta give us this, right? Like there's no way that we can know all of these args off the top of our head. I want to say it's like host, username, password. We can actually set those up too. Let's do like a router dictionary. So we can say like host is going to be, what am I connecting to on the outside? I got to remember that IP address. I've already forgotten the IP address. Show IP interface brief. So I'm connecting in from the LAN, so it's going to be 10.10.21.233. Can I ping that just to make sure I've got connectivity? Ping 10.10.21.233. Yep, we got round trip connectivity. So I shouldn't have any issues here. Okay, so my IP is going to be 10.10.21.233. Username is going to be, I just set these to admin. PW is going to be admin. The port by default for netconf is 830. I don't know if I need to specify that. Off the top of my head, again, it's one of those things like I don't remember the parameters for connect. And IntelliSense is just beating me up. Ugh. I know there's a way you could actually get the parameters. Hang on, one second. We're going to get this. All right, so I just adjusted these lab tasks to actually provide the NC client documentation because trying to figure out, you know, those parameters for the connect method is just going to be ridiculous. So if I bring up the lab tasks here and go to automation, you should see the link and you can click on it and it will take you to this page here. So there are some things that it tells us out of the gate. Like this example right here is a great one where it specifies host, port, username, host key verify equals false. You probably also have to specify a password somewhere. And then, of course, the device params. So since we're trying to connect to a CSR device, it's going to be important that we specify the device params. So what you can actually do, or what we can do, is we can kind of mimic this. So if I do a little split screen action here, I can see the code over there. I can say host equals, and we say it's going to be router host. And you know what? I'm actually looking at this right now, and I realize like I should probably make the actual appearance a little bit easier for you to see. So let me zoom in, and maybe I do one more so you can see the code a little bit better. That might work. That might work. Let's try this. So host is going to be router host. Username is going to equal router user. Password is going to equal router PW. And port, we didn't specify a port, but I can put it, and it's a integer on that side, so good to know. Host key verify equals false. Capital F there is important. And device underscore params equals, and then a dictionary name in a single quote colon, and then in a single quote CSR. So I've got the parameter specified now: host, username, password, port, host key verify, and device params. I'm going to say as m, and we're going to start by printing the capabilities. So we'll say print m dot, what is it, server capabilities, client? I think it's server capabilities that I'm looking for here, right there. Trying to debate if I want to save this as a, let's, YOLO. Let's go with it. Let's run this code. Okay, so it did return a iterator object. Dict key iterator object. Okay, cool. That means it probably returned it as XML. And we're going to have some fun with this then. You know, I probably should have brushed up on this before I jumped in here. But that's okay. In fact, here's the documentation on capabilities there. Doesn't really tell us a whole lot. So if it's an iterator object, just thinking off the top of my mind, let's do this. Let's call these capabilities caps and say for cap in caps, print cap, see what it does. There they are. Okay. Figured that one out. Got the capabilities printed out. So these are all the Yang data models that are available to us. And now we can move forward getting our config based on that filter. Really don't want to do any XML parsing. In this one, it didn't say to do any XML parsing. So let's just kind of go forward with this. And on a new line, we'll say int config is going to equal m.get. Let's pass in a filter. What are you, args? Tell me more. Okay, that's all it tells us is args. I think you specify filter and specify our variable above as filter. And let's print the int config. See what it returns. And run it. So this is going to print out all those capabilities again, and it blows up, okay? Opening and ending tag mismatch. Interfaces. Line 3. Oh, did I actually type something wrong in my actual filter? Doesn't look like a mismatch to me, except it does. Interfaces. Right there. So, a little bit of troubleshooting. We had the opening tag of interfaces, didn't have the closing tag. Easy fix. There they are. Cool. There's the RPC reply. I see the IP address, the IP, the net mask. Yep, so here is the running config. Not worried about parsing this from XML. You know, I don't know what client libraries we'll have to work with in the first place. They've already said we won't be able to install client libraries. I asked that in the webinar. Would we be able to install our own libraries that would help us with these things? They said no. But at least at this point, we've accomplished our first objective, which was use NC client to print this info out. So there we go, NC client. I'm chalking this one up to a win and saying we've met their objectives here and used NC client with supporting documentation, because like I said, I mean, who's going to remember all of his parameters when it comes time? Who's going to be able to type this, like who's going to remember this XML filter? You know, I hope they don't do that to us, but they might. All right, next one. Configure or use Postman to access the RESTconf interface to also retrieve the running config. I'm going to guess again, that's the gig interface config. So yeah, let's have some fun then. Postman. I already got Postman installed and up and running on my machine. Well, I think the last time I used it was for some DNA Center stuff. Yep, look at all those DNA Center things here. So let me clean this up. Let me clean up all these tabs, and then we'll come back to it when we're ready to talk about RESTconf. Okay, I've got that environment cleaned up. We're going to start a new request. And I'm just going to call this iOS XE REST or something like that. I'll put it in like my iOS XE library that I have right here. And just click Save to iOS XE. All right, so our request URL, this is going to be a GET request, like we said before, HTTPS 10.10.21.233. The data store, is it data and then RESTconf, or is it just RESTconf? I think it's just RESTconf. This is another one of those times where we probably should have provided some supporting documentation. I'm just going to peek at one of my other requests here, like GET interfaces. It says RESTconf data, then the data store. Okay, so RESTconf, I was in the right idea. And then we're going to be doing IETF is going to be our Yang model here. So that's going to be the module, and then the specific tree that we're in is going to be the interface. I don't believe this is going to return to me. We're going to do basic authentication. I don't believe that's going to return to me the running config. I think that's going to be returning to me just operational statistics. So we may have to do like, actually it won't. I think that will return to me the config. Let's do admin, admin. Make sure that I have self-signed certificate turned off. Okay, yeah, so SSL verification is off. Let's send it. Oh, obviously that's not going to work. We got to specify our headers. So let's specify some headers here. The first one is going to be accept. We are looking for application, what is it? Yang hyphen data plus JSON, and our content type. It's also Yang data JSON. So I think this should do, okay, URI key path not found, invalid value. Okay. So interestingly, I am getting a JSON response. I'm getting a 404 not found. So that means the web server is up and running, but it might not like my data model themselves. So I do have this where we can actually look at the capabilities. Let's try 10.10.21.233. So this will go to RESTconf data, netconf state capabilities. Authorization, I'll change this real quick to be admin and admin. I think my headers are already set. Yep. Okay, so RESTconf is definitely working. That's the first thing we know by seeing this. Do I have IETF interfaces? IETF. There's interfaces EXT. That might be what it's looking for, is IETF interfaces EXT. Let's try hyphen EXT. Nope, still didn't like that. Okay. Let's see. Can I find IETF? Oh, there's IETF interfaces right there. Right above it. IETF interfaces. Oh, is it? It's because I typed interface and not interfaces. Let's try that. Just a typo. There it is, right there. And there's the config too. So this accomplishes our task for RESTconf. We enabled RESTconf. We hit the correct IP address. I mean, I guess if you have to memorize something, remember that it's RESTconf then data. We can do post requests to change these things if we want to like try and send in a a payload that changes the description. We could do something like that. So I think we can do like, let's see if we can narrow this down to be just to have some fun. I want to try interface, gigabit, Ethernet 1. Let's see if I can get just that one Okay, so there's just interface gig Ethernet 1. So since I have this, I'm going to duplicate this request. So now I have this request. I'm going to change it to be a put request. Let me jump back. I'm just going to change the description just to have some fun. Let's do this. So in the put request, we're going to specify a body, raw, JSON, looks good, paste it. Change the description to be, you know, Knox was here. I don't know. Something as simple as that. Send it. Oh, bad request. I didn't like that. Oh yeah, because we gotta have to specify interface gig 1. Oh no. Let's try that. Okay, so I've got a 204 no content back here on auto machine, show run interface gig 1. And there, the description's been changed. So now we know how to use RESTconf. We can, grab the payload, set a more specific URL to target a specific interface, and then, pass the payload into a put request if we need to make, a config change to something as stupid as the description. You can change the IP address right there. And of course, like I say, we've got content all over this. In fact, John McGovern, IPv0, just got done recording specifically some like advanced RESTconf configuration, like creating VLANs on switches and stuff. He actually logged into my DNA center switches, the actual physical switches that are sitting in my other room, to do those config changes, and had some fun with that. So he was SSHing in all the way from Scotland into my devices to do some RESTconf advanced training for you. So if any of that was fuzzy, definitely go check out our training on CVT Nuggets. RESTconf is covered in DevNet Associate, Encore, in Auto, and the upcoming DevCore course. It's talked about briefly in the SD Access course. Yeah, okay, so done with steps 1 through 4. Now configure gRPC streaming telemetry on the CSR 1000V to log whenever the CDP neighbor changes. So for this, I am going to go split screen so we can keep a look on all of these parameters that we're working on over here. And let's go into configuration mode. The commands to start this are going to be telemetry IETF. So that means we're doing a model driven, because models are, lots of times, not always, but lots of times dictated by the IETF. It's going to be streaming telemetry. We're going to call this a subscription, and you give it like a subscription ID or a number. I'm just going to say 1. Okay, so now we're in the subscription config mode, and it's time to start configuring these things. So if you hit question mark, there's some things that we have to specify here, but there's not a lot, like it's not overwhelming, and there's keywords that I set in this that should give away what we're trying to do. The first thing we're trying to do is we have to set up who's going to receive this. So the receiver is going to be our IP address that we specified 10.33.33.2. Then there's some more things that it needs. It says it doesn't recognize that command. Okay, receiver you specify IP, receiver IP 10.33.33.2, question mark. Still doesn't like this. Receiver IP address 10.33.33.2, then question mark. What is the port that it's listening on? It tells us 57,000. Then the last thing is what protocol do we want to specify? And my head is covering this at this point, so let me just hit enter a few times so you can kind of see the command up till this point. It's receiver IP address and so on. Then the protocol is going to be gRPC. Now this is the kicker. We press question mark here. There's gRPC TCP and gRPC TLS. And really all of the output that you see here is very specific to the version of CSR 1000V or iOS XE that you're using. In fact, most of these options right here were not even available until iOS XE 16.10. gRPC was not available until 16.10. Beyond that, you have to look to make sure that your platform is capable of supporting TLS. Does the TIG stack support TLS? Does your iOS XE device support TLS? So for my case, I'm going to put gRPC TCP just to be safe, so it's not using TLS or leveraging TLS, and we're not fighting with self-signed certificates or anything like that. So receiver is now done. Traffic should be sourced from gig 2. So if you hit question mark, you see there is a source address command. We'll say our source IP address is 10.33.33.1. Let's specify anything else. Nope, hit enter. Okay, we should attempt to deliver updates on change. That means we're not going to be specifying any sort of, I think this is where we specify the update policy. And that's where it is, on change. Cool. So we hit enter there. So instead of periodic, we're specifying the update policy is on change. Should filter out of traffic based on the following XPath. So we say filter XPath, and then we're going to copy and paste this XPath in. So it's basically whenever this XPath, which is the list of CDP neighbors structured in XML, notices a change, our update policy will be to send a change out the source interface address that we specified to the target with Yang structured data. Oh no. Forgot to click copy. Here we go. Okay, what have I done? Let's hit enter a few times here. And let's do filter XPath and then paste in the XPath. Okay. Should push Yang push, should push a Yang push stream. There is a stream command. Stream Yang push. Okay. So, and then should be set to, okay, the encoding should be set to encode gRPC traffic such that the TIG stack can understand. So when we go to encoding, there is the KVGPB. That is what it's looking for. So we'll say encode KVGPB. This is just things like you just got to know about your platform. There's nothing here that says that was a TIG stack encoding, but that's it. So now if I do show run section telemetry, look at all these commands here. We've got the encoding, which is for the TIG stack encoding. We've got the filter, which specifies our CDP neighbor details filter, the source address, the stream, the update policy, and the receiver IP. Now we have officially created an on-change streaming telemetry subscription. So that, and it leverages gRPC, and that covers the exact bullet point that's on the CCIE exam blueprint. So now we're exiting out of this, and it's time to move on to Guestshell. So Guestshell, this device is running Linux under the hood. And when it comes with Linux, it comes with Python and the actual shell that you can leverage here. So we can actually install Python scripts and run those scripts directly on this machine. Beyond that, we can trigger EEM applets to run those Python scripts. So if somebody accidentally shuts down, a loopback interface or something, the Python script could bring the interface back up and send an email or push a notification to Slack because it does everything Python does, which is really cool. But this one, quite frankly, it's not easy. To get this up and running. There's oftentimes a lot of headaches, and like I warned before we got into this, it's very possible I'm about to encounter headaches because I've never done it on this exact platform before. The newer versions of iOS XE, I've never done it in a virtualized environment like EVE-NG, so we're going to find out. So step 6, on CSR 1000V, enable IOX. So that's not a configuration. This is done from privilege modes. Right here, IOX. IOX. Bad IP address or host name, unknown command or computer name, or unable to find. Okay, so if I hit question mark, IOX should be there. Is it a config? IOX? It is a config. Okay, so I was wrong. I thought we did that on privilege mode, but that was incorrect. We do it in the configuration mode. The Guestshell commands are done in privilege mode. So let's let the IOX server start. There will be a syslog notification once it gets started. I'll exit out of config mode. And once, I had to backtrack there. So IOX is definitely a config. And now, so the command typically to do this is Guestshell enable to turn the Guestshell on. Again, like I said, in some platforms this works, in some platforms it doesn't. If I press enter, here we go. Interface will be selected if configured in app hosting. Please wait for completion. The process for the command is not responding or is otherwise unavailable. We might still be waiting for IOX to be starting. So I'm going to let this sit for a few minutes. I'm going to pause recording and just let it sit, let it find its feet, so to speak, and then come back to it in a couple minutes, and we'll pick up from there. All right, so now it's time to tackle Guestshell, and here's The real truth. This is the honest transparency here. You may have seen a little bit of a jump cut there, and now you're seeing the screen looks a little bit different. That's because this isn't the first time I've attempted to record this. Like I said before, when we got this started, this was going to be a new version of iOS XE, and I've had troubles with Guestshell in the past, but I eventually got there. And of course, in this version of iOS XE, version 17.1.1, it was wildly different from what I had done in the past. So basically, almost all the things that I had learned in the past to make Guestshell work just flat out didn't work, and I had to spend some time troubleshooting it and learning it over again and figuring out why did I do it last time and it worked and this time it didn't, and so on. And eventually I got it to get there. And I recorded that whole thing, but it was just unwatchable garbage. So here we go. This is going to be the actual way to implement Guestshell on iOS XE version 17.1. Before we go into this, let's clear this up too. You need to be very well aware of which version of iOS XE is going to be present in the actual exam environment and the commands that might be applicable to that. You also need to understand what it's going to be like in your own environment, because you may sit down and try this on a Catalyst 3850 that's running iOS XE 16.9 or something like that. And it's going to be not totally, the gist of it, the steps are going to be the same, but the commands themselves will be different. So, take this with a little grain of salt, but know that the workflow, these steps that are listed here, within the tasks, that is what you want to go for. All right, so one other thing, this is important. The CSR 1000V, to do this, has to have more horsepower than the default. So I think when you add a node in EvenG, it gives you like 1 core and 3 gigs of RAM. I had to ratchet mine up to 4 cores and 8 gigs of RAM to get this to run without any issues. Otherwise, when you go to enable it, it will literally throw syslog commands saying like CPU under too much pressure and then reboot the device. So there's that. Okay, so now that that's said, and this preference is here, let's begin on step 6. Okay, so the first step is turn on IOX. This is like the virtualization platform so that we can run applications within our CSR 1000V. They run alongside the iOS application. So to do this, we go into config mode and we simply type IOX. And here's the thing, now that IOX is entered, this is going to take 2 or 3 minutes to get started. So we look at the syslog message there. I see the 004033. So I'm going to hit pause, and I'm going to come back to this after a few minutes. There's going to be a syslog message that says it was enabled and it has started. We can't do anything until this IOX process is fully up and running. So I'm hitting pause. We'll come back to it once it's up and running. All right, so there's the syslog message. About 2 minutes later, it says IOX is ready. If I hit end and go back to privilege mode, I can actually do show IOX. We can actually see that 3 of the processes are running. We need the first one to be running, the IOX service CAF. That's the big one. So as long as you see that one running, you're good to go. Now, step 7, enable Guestshell. This may require a virtual port group. In my experience, it always requires a virtual port group. But if you already have management interfaces established, like this is a management interface, it's identified as a management interface, you can actually, from privilege mode, just type Guestshell enable. Since I don't have a management interface, and pretty much no CSR 1000V comes out of the gate with that, we have to configure it this way. So we're creating a virtual port group so that the application itself can communicate to the iOS XE environment. So this is how it does that. We're basically going to say, when this Linux machine or this Linux container boots up, this is going to be its IP address, and it needs to communicate into iOS XE through the virtual port group. So the first thing we have to do is we have to create a virtual port. Okay, come on now, work with me. It is virtual port group, right? Yes. Interface virtual port group. There, thank you. I was really struggling to type there for a second, and then you just give it a name like virtual port group 0. We're going to give this an IP address. I'm going to set it to 192.168.144. Let me hit tab so it's clean. .1.255.255.255.0. So the idea here is that when the Linux machine boots up that we're going to be working with, this is going to be our Guestshell, this IP address that we just assigned, that's going to be its gateway. So that's how they're going to communicate into iOS XE. There's another catch. a subtle nuance that comes to when it comes to actually working with Python scripts and communicating to the guest shell as well. So let's do some other things first, though. The virtual port group, if we want our Linux, if we want our Unix instance, our Linux instance to actually be able to communicate out to the internet, if we want to do pip install in the Python environment, we're going to have to actually perform a NAT outbound towards the internet to make that happen. So we're going to say IP NAT inside. This is going to be the inside interface. I'll go to interface gig1, which is my actual outside interface, and say IP NAT outside. I'll exit out of the interface configuration, and we'll create the IP access list standard. Let's call this NAT out. We're going to say permit 192.168.0.0. How about that? 1.2. There we go. IP NAT inside source list NAT out interface gig 1 overload. Okay, so now NAT should be configured. There's one other thing, like I was saying, for Python to actually be able to communicate into iOS XE, it actually leverages the HTTP protocol, not HTTPS. You see, by default, this thing has HTTPS turned on, IP HTTP secure servers turned on, but HTTP is not. So we actually do have to do IP HTTP server to turn on HTTP so that we can actually run Python scripts. If you go to run the Python scripts, it's going to throw a weird error that says log is not part of the global, it's not identified in the global spectrum. So it's trying to use a log variable that doesn't exist because that log variable somehow exists in the HTTP. I don't know. It's bizarre, but I promise you have to have HTTP server running, at least in this version of iOS XE. So we've got the virtual port group identified. We have HTTP server turned on. Now we have to configure the actual IP address settings that's going to be running in the Linux Unix environment. And to do that, it is app, hit tab, app hosting, app ID, guest shell. Press enter, and this takes us into the app hosting section. You see the guest shell is an app that it is hosting. iOS XE is hosting. So we have to identify all kinds of stuff here. So the command looks like this. It's vnic, and then you'll press question mark, and you see you've got some options here. Now, in pretty much all of the documentation that I've pretty much ever found on configuring this section here. So first of all, you might not find anything on configuring app hosting at all when it comes to guest shell. Some people might just say enable guest shell and it works without configuring any of this. In my experience, that's not true unless you've got the management interfaces already identified. But if you don't, the documentation that does say, oh, you have to configure app hosting, well, it almost always points to these gateways, gateway 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they say that's what maps to the NICs on the app instance. But for what in iOS XE 17.1 on the CSR 1000 this has not worked for me. I have had to use management specified. This is actually going to be a management interface. And the command here gets really, really long. And since I know my head in the bottom right corner is going to cover it up, I'm going to bring up this right here. So you can see the command, actually I'm just going to stretch, yeah, that's it. So it's vnic management, vnic, not vnec, vnic management, virtual port group 0, guest interface 0, guest IP address. So this is going to be saying for the virtual port group 0, the guest application's first interface 0 needs to have this IP address with this subnet mask. This will be its default gateway, and this will be its DNS server. Secondly, the next command is we're going to create a custom resource profile and allot it 1500 of CPU and 512 of RAM. This custom here, this is an actual name, but it's limited into what you can name it. It can be like tiny, small, large, something else, and custom. Those are the only words that you can put in the place of custom right there. So I am going to copy these both with a little right click, copy, and I'm just going to delete all this out and paste them in. Oh, it didn't like something. There is a bad character somewhere that it didn't like. All right, let's try it. We may end up having to type this out. So vnic management guest interface, I believe that's 0. Yeah, 0 is fine. Guest IP address, we said 192.168.144.2, question mark. Net mask was 255.255.255.255.0. The gateway, oh, didn't like something there. This is where it's blowing up on me, it's the net mask. Right? 255. Okay, now we're good. Something about that net mask, I didn't like it the first time. The gateway, 192.168.144. Oh, yeah, I had too many 255s and then a 0. What am I thinking about? Okay. So then 192, the gateway is .1. That was going to be our IP address of the virtual port group. The name server, I'm just going to put it as 8888. And we're going to set this as default. So that will be the default gateway, and that's it. So now we've got that configuration in place. Let's make sure the resource profile, just make sure one more time. Okay, so you get this thing here that says this is a hidden command. It's not recommended to be used and will be removed in the future. We'll do the resource profile. It says the exact same thing. It's a hidden command. Use of this is not recommended and will be removed in the future. So at this point, we've now created the virtual port group so the application can commute in. We're natting it outbound, and now we've created the actual app hosting IP address and configuration items itself. Now we can actually enable the actual application itself. So to do that, we go all the way back to privilege mode. We get out of configuration mode, and now we can say Guestshell enable, and we press enter. And this could take a few seconds, a few minutes. It really depends on your instance. In my experience, this one came up pretty quickly last time. So I may pause it and then come back to it when it's done. It just should only take a few minutes, but we'll see. So it really did take about 45 more seconds after I hit stop. And you do have to wait till you get this. So you see all this stuff that says it's successfully installed, deployed, blah, 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 running. But you really want to wait for the syslog message where IOX is telling you that Guestshell is up. That's what you're really looking for, is the syslog message to pop up on the screen. So our step 8 right here is to access Guestshell. So to do that, it's just Guestshell. You press enter, wait a couple seconds for it to actually launch into the Guestshell, and there it is. So now we've got all of our Linux commands that always work the way they normally do. So our next step, in step 9, is to use VI to create a script called show IP interface brief. So we're going to do that. We're going to create a script called show_IP interface_brief.py for Python. Here we get launched into VI. I'm going to press the I key to go into the insert mode so I can start typing. And it tells us here that in the script, create a script that will print out the output of show IP interface brief and the current date and time to the terminal. So to do CLI commands, like issuing CLI show commands or actually issuing config commands, we have to import the library. So we say from CLI, import star, and that comes with a bunch of different functions and classes that you can work with. Oh, not M. And let's go to the end here and press the actual enter key. And then we're going to say for datetime, from datetime, import datetime, because I really just don't like typing datetime.datetime. I don't know why. I know that's not, a lot of people feel strongly that you should type the whole thing out, but I don't know, it just seems kind of obnoxious to me. So let's do, let's call this show output, create a variable called show output, and set it to the CLI function that is nothing more than show IP interface brief. Wrap that in quotes, so that way it says, go to the CLI, type the show command, tell me what you see. Know this, that if you're like in interface config mode and you try to run this Python script from interface config mode, it's not going to type this, your output is not actually going to be printed out to the terminal when you're in config mode. You have to be in privilege mode in order to actually see the output. Man, I did it again. Okay, so let's do this. And let's go to the end here. And we're going to print show output. So that's what gets printed out to the terminal. I'm also going to print just a blank space, and then I'll print date time dot now and wrap that in quotes. So this is the script, pretty basic stuff. I'm going to press escape to exit out of insert mode, type colon WQ for write and quit, and now I'm back in Guestshell. So what we need to do now is we'll just test it first. So I'm going to type exit from Guestshell to take me back into the CLI mode. And what I can do now is I can say Guestshell run and then Python and then specify show IP interface brief.py. There it is. So there you know. There we have it. We've created a Python script that's hosted on Guestshell and can communicate into my iOS XE interface, get some show output, print out the current date time all the way down into that tiny little timestamp. And our last step here is create an EEM applet that will run the script when interface gig2 has been shut down. So this is one little thing, maybe it's secure CRT, maybe it's virtualization or whatever. When you exit out of the Guestshell, like the console, it messes up my whole terminal here, and I can only see like the first third of the screen. So I'm just going to close the terminal real quick, reopen it, set it back up. There we go. And now I'm back to normal. Okay, so now it's time to create an EEM applet that when gig2 is shut down, it runs that Python script. So I'll go into config T, and we're going to say event manager applet, and what do I want to call this? Shut. So the first thing we have to do is we are trying to identify what is the event that's going to trigger this. So if I take a look at this, we're going to say when a syslog message matches a pattern that looks like this. And I have it right here. Interface gigabit Ethernet 2, comma, change state to administratively down. So if you need to copy this out, you can just actually go into interface gig2, shut it down real quick, and copy the output out that comes from the syslog. But I'll paste it in here and press enter. And now we want to run, that's going to be one of our actions. So if I say action, it's going to ask you like, what's the name of your action? I'm just going to call it 1. It's nice and clean and alphabetized that way, really numerically sorted that way, I should say. And we are going to run the CLI command, which is going to be CLI command. And then we specify the exact command we just ran. Guestshell run Python show IP underscore interface brief.py. Well, that kind of works out nicely that it like formats the screen this way right before I had to look over to see where my head is in relation to where, anyways. So there we go. So now if I'm going to exit out of this, I'm just going to do show run, pipe this to section event. So you can see kind of the output here that we've created. It's kind of long. First, we're matching the syslog pattern of the interface gig2 is down. The action 1 is going to be to run this command, the Guestshell run Python. Now, again, like I said before, when we go into config mode, go into interface gig2, now we're in config mode. So we're not actually going to be able to see the output of this particular Python script, but we can validate that it ran, which is important. And really the thought here is, you know, what would you really use a Python script for? Because I could use an EEM applet to turn the interface back on. I don't need a Python script for that. To me, the Python script is signaling we need to connect to some sort of other resource like Slack or MS Teams and post a message to a private channel that says somebody shut down this interface or something like that. That's where Python, I think, comes in. Or it could, maybe access other devices in the network and reconfigure them in a certain way. There's all sorts of things that you could use Python for that you can't use some functionalities in EEM applets for. Anyways, I'm on my soapbox. Let's hit shut, and that'll, we'll get the syslog message that says interface gig2 administratively shut down. There it is right there, interface gig2. Change state to administratively down. So I'll just hit this a couple times and give it a no shut. It's going to come back up. Another nuance about the CSR1000V 17.1. I had to use the VMXNet drivers. VMXNet 3, the E1000 wouldn't work. So anyways, there you go. So administratively down, back to up. So now check this out. We can go to show, event, come on, manager, history, detail. Detail, maybe? Events detail. That's right. I forgot one. So check that out. See, we see the event that triggered it. See the applet that we created shut right there. It was successfully run. So we know that this was triggered and actually ran through the action. There was no errors that it gave us. We just weren't able to see the output because we were in the config mode, which is kind of a bummer. But there we have. I wonder if I did it like really fast. Probably not. Probably can't do it. It's probably too quick for that. Shut end. Let's see. No, doesn't look like it's going to happen for me. That's okay. It was a valiant effort. Show event manager history events, or is it events history? Events history detail. Oh man, it was history of events detail. There we go. So yeah, there we see it was run again. there it was again, which is fine. So anyways, that's it. Now we've gone through the whole process, and that was a much cleaner recording of how to actually enable the Guestshell. You just got to trust me that like things like enabling the HTTP server was really weird. Doing the VNIC for management instead of gateway really threw me off. In fact, not even having my CSR sized correctly, so it threw the CPU processor. Anyways, that first recording was a whole mess. But I did have to have a newer version so that we could do telemetry. Remember that gRPC was not enabled in iOS XE until 16.10. So my thought was like, well, I don't have 16.10. I might as well go for 17 since I got it. So that's it. That's automation. I hope y'all liked this content, and let me know, comment, like, subscribe. Let me know what you think about it. Thanks for stopping by, y'all. See you in the next one.